What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a jam-packed show as we have a lot of volleyball to get into, such as the NVA having Event 5. It's the last week of the regular season as we only have two playoff spots remaining in each conference. One in each conference. Which teams will get it? Also, the VNL on the women's side has unveiled its top 8. Who will be battling it out for the gold, and who barely missed the cut, and who just did not make the cut altogether. And the men's side is in a little bit of a close race, as the U.S. is just behind Japan for first place. Also, the AVP's Denver Open did not disappoint, as we had two champions being crowned on the men's and women's side, and the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championship has been announced, and on a specific date, and on a specific channel, and on a specific time. What will that be? Hand me a volleyball. Set the net, because I'm about to serve you up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday afternoon, Monday evening, Monday wherever you are listening from. Either way, you have made your way into episode 201 of Set Point. Feels weird saying 200 nowadays, but what can you do? And without any further delay, let's get started. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio providing the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and on Instagram at IE Sports Radio. And if you're still on the Book of Faces, just type in the word IE, then Sports, then Radio. You'll see the icon, and all you just gotta do is like us, and then boom, that's how you're able to follow us on Facebook. We also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and when you go there, you will see all 30 of our shows, including this one, Set Point. And in addition, our website includes our blog page, our Hall of Fame, and our merchandise shop. And when you go to our shop, you will see t-shirts, tank tops, caps, and hoodies, with more items to be included in the near future. Because for the past 9 years and counting, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content, ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, such as Avery Drost from last week, coaches, such as Mark Rosen from last week, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next step. Thank you to everyone for all of your support and for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that is sports. Thank you to everyone for all of your support for this show and for all of our shows on IE Sports Radio. And without any further delay, let's do this. Let's start off with some NVA talk. I always start off with the NVA last, or I always put the NVA last, but I'm going to switch it up, and I'm going to discuss some NVA, as we have some NVA discussion in the chat room on Spreaker. Larry B says, go Matadors. Adam Karnik says, go Untouchables. And Mike Pat says, go future DMV NVA team, NVA volleyball team. NVA volleyball team. I'm just kidding. It could happen. We all just got to keep making the NVA much bigger and better. Soon. Soon, Mike, soon. But before I get on into the preview of event number 5, I actually have to go over some NVA news, because I, Teran Rodriguez, am your one-stop shop for all that is NVA news. As we had a couple bits of NVA news. So this one kind of came on Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday when I tweeted this out. But the NVA made it official on their website that the Chicago Untouchables had to forfeit their matches against the San Diego Wild and the New Jersey Freedom as unfortunately they were a no-show to event number 4 due to unseen and unfortunate circumstances. And with that, unfortunately, that puts the Untouchables record at 2-6, and there will be a playoff preview or playoff forecast article that will be released in the near future. And I mean near future as in this week. So, yeah. So, for that, unfortunately, the Untouchables now pretty much have to win their next 2 matches, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Meanwhile, for the Freedom, this actually pushes their record to 5-3 and actually gets them into the playoffs. So they can no longer finish anywhere lower than 4th. Matter of fact, I don't think they can finish anywhere lower than 3rd. So the Freedom are in the playoffs, which is not surprising. They actually still have a chance to be the number 1 seed, but that's going to involve the Orange County Stunners losing out and the Texas Tyrants losing out. Oh, and the Freedom have to win out. Oh, and also the Tyrants pretty much have to not lose in like 5 sets, as well as the Stunners. So, yeah. And Mike, I'm just giving you some flack for that. I'm just joshing you. I'm just yanking your chain. But I'm sorry, buddy. I'm not trying to rag on you. Adam Karnick makes this bold prediction, which I will be saving for the NVA preview. But that is basically it for the Chicago Untouchables news. Now, I think on that same day, if not the day after, I tweeted out that the NVA was actually going to have an event, just an exhibition match, last Saturday. And they did have an exhibition match last Saturday between the San Diego Wild and the Orange County Stunners. And this was kind of actually organized by the Wild, just because Nick England is the head coach of the Wild and is kind of the head honcho of the NVA, or one of the head honchos. So it was a very fun event, as it was just an exhibition match. This didn't count toward either the Stunners or the Wild's record, but it was a very thrilling match. This took place at the Anaheim Convention Center, so technically the Stunners were the so-called home team, but the Wild didn't have to travel all that far, though it was a pretty long drive for them, going from San Diego all the way to Anaheim. So basically, neither team didn't really have a full team. I mean, the Wild had 7 players, and they didn't really have their big guys like Brandon Rattray. They did have Kendall Ratter. They had debuted a new setter, Brock Henderson. And then they had Uchenna Ofoa, who is kind of their notable face on the Wild, if you've seen their matches. And they also had Sam Berge. I think it's Berge or Berge? Berge. Either way, the former UCLA player. And then a few other players that you've probably not really heard of that much. They also had Joel Lauerkamp. So the Wild didn't really have too many quantity names. They only had 7 guys. The Stunners only had 8 guys, if not 9 guys. And they didn't have their big guys like Matt Hilling or Spencer Olivier or Grant Maroki. They did have Nick West. They didn't have Hui Ding at libero. They did have Ignacio Roberts at setter. And then they had a few other hitters. They had Damani Lenore playing middle, which was not his primary position. He normally plays right side. But it was good to see Damani Lenore getting back onto the court. Nick West was a force for the Stunners. So all in all, it was an interesting match. Obviously, it was an exhibition match just because both teams were missing a lot of key players. So in the first set, it looked like the Wild were going to basically take this set by storm. But the Stunners rallied back in the middle of the set. And eventually, it looked like they were going to the set by a little bit more than a close score. But then the Wild came back, made it a 1-point game, but the Stunners closed the door and won the first set 25-23. Then the next 2 sets belonged to the Wild, as they won that by more than 5 points, as they won the second set 25-16, and they won the third set 25-19 to give them a 2-1 lead in the match. Then the fourth set, the Wild were leading for the most part of the set, but there was some inkling in everyone's mind. Like, if you've seen the Stunners, you know they do not fold easily. Like, you have to really go out there and outwit them. So it was 24-21, match point for the Wild, but then the Stunners scored 3 straight points, and suddenly it was 24-24. Now, I, for one, was not surprised just because this is what the Stunners do practically every match. Like, sometimes just when they're on the verge of losing, they find a way to pull out the win and force either a fifth set or they just don't go to a fifth set. But in the fourth set, eventually the Stunners took that fourth set 28-26, and suddenly the match was going 5, and it was very impressive. Like, considering we didn't have a 5-set match in Event 4, even though we only had 10 matches, honestly, this kind of made up for it. So I was happy that we saw a 5-set match between these two teams. And in the fifth set, the Wild actually led 7-3, but then the Stunners came back to tie it up at 9-9, and the two teams just went back and forth with one another. Neither team led by more than 1 point, and the Stunners pretty much controlled the late stages of set 5. They had 3 match points, and eventually they capitalized on the third match point as they got a block from Nick West to end the match. And that is basically the best way to end a match, a walk-off block. And as our good friend Ira Thor from the NVA would say, reach out and stuff someone! And that was how the Stunners basically won this match. And it was a great match. And for the record, and I will just say this could honestly be an NVA Finals preview. Just because if you know the teams' records by heart, and if you know their standing in their respective conference, you know that both of these teams are atop their respective conference and going into Event 5. And heck, these two teams could meet in the finals. That's a big could, though. Like, anything could happen come playoff time. Like, sometimes even the best teams play their worst volleyball, so we'll see. But it was an overall great event. There was a few hundred people. I want to say like 200 or so people at this event, which is more than most, which, no offense to the NVA, but it's more than most people show up for in an average NVA match. Which, that's no disrespect, but there was just a lot of people here. Like, it was quite phenomenal. There were little kids that were being coached by some of the players of the NVA, like Uchenna Afoa had kids. Like, Uchenna Afoa was the fan favorite. He was taking pictures with little kids while he was getting rest, and he was out of the rotation. So, I think, honestly, it was just a great event, and at the end of the match, there was just a lot of wholesome moments. Everyone got to take pictures, and some even got to have their autographs signed by the NVA players. And that's just something amazing that you like to see. And this is how you grow the game of volleyball and the NVA. Heck, even Nick England signed someone's autograph. I think he signed a Croc, and he did sign a Croc, which is a shoe, and it was quite amazing. It's just one of those wholesome moments that you just love to see, and I'm glad Nick was able to make a young fan's day, as well as some of the other players making other young fans' days. And I even got to see some friends of mine that were at this event. But they were coaching club volleyball, but they got to see this NVA match. And I got to see some familiar faces from the NVA. I got to see Haley Henderson, one of the sideline reporters for the NVA, as she was cheering on her brother Brock, who, believe it or not, Brock Henderson, he is not officially on the San Diego Wild, but I'm willing to bet that he's eventually going to join the Wild once he's done with his 4-year college career. You have to remember that Brock Henderson just won a state championship with Orange Coast College's men's volleyball team. And you got to remember that Orange Coast College is only a 2-year college. And you basically are transferring to a 4-year, and then you're going to be closing out your college career there and then. Unless you basically don't want to play college going forward. But we'll see what happens with Brock Henderson. Henderson did really well at the setter position. He's 6'8", 6'9", and the dude really can dump the ball well. And I really think whoever picks him up is getting a beast of a setter. So better scoop him up as soon as you can. but we'll see what happens with Brock Henderson going forward. But that is basically going to do it for the exhibition match between the Wild and the Stunners. Jumping on over to event number 5, and this is what everyone wants to hear. They want to hear the event 5 and the preview for this. Alright, so event number 5 is basically the final event of the regular season. This is basically win or go home time. 6 playoff spots have been clinched right now. 3 in each conference, which basically means that only one playoff spot remains in each conference. And basically, it means only one team is going to be able to get that final spot and advance to the playoffs, while the other teams are unfortunately going home. So, as of right now, in the National Conference, the Orange County Stunners and the Texas Tyrants are tied atop the standings with 7 wins, 1 loss, and 20 points. And the Stunners actually have a better set win-loss ratio than the Tyrants. So, that's why they're ahead. It's not because of head-to-head, but it is because of set wins and losses ratio. That is something that Nick England also talked about if you saw my interview with Nick England post the Wild Stunners exhibition match. And those two have clinched their playoff spot, but the Stunners have not clinched their division. The Tyrants have clinched their division, and they are looking to clinch the conference. The Freedom are 5-3, and they have 18 points. Now, like I said, they can still clinch the number 1 seed, but you have to remember, the Freedom are 5-3, and that would require them basically winning out, and it would have to require the Stunners losing out, and then it would also require the Tyrants losing out, which would mean they'd have to lose to the Blaze and the Untouchables, and possibly not in... Well, I mean, the Tyrants could still lose in 5 sets in both those matches, but then the Freedom could still swoop in and get that number 1 seed. But you have to also remember that the Freedom have to pretty much win in 3 or 4 sets to get the full 3 points. If they win in 5 sets, they get 2 points, and if they lose in 5 sets, they get 1 point. If they lose in 3 or 4 sets, they get nothing. Anyway, now in 4th place is the Puerto Rico Pythons, who are 3-5 and have 10 points. Beneath them or below them is the Chicago Untouchables, who are 2-6 and have 6 points. Now, for Adam and his Chicago Untouchables, this is where it really gets tough for the Untouchables. The Untouchables basically have to win out, and the Pythons have to lose out. If that happens, the Untouchables are bound for the playoffs. Here's the problem with the Untouchables. They play the Texas Tyrants. That's already tough right there. And they also play the Los Angeles Blaze, which is right below the Untouchables, which is a 1 game below them. They are 1-7-4. And the Blaze surprisingly still have a chance to make the playoffs, but it's a long shot of a chance. They would have to basically win out, and they'd have to win in 3 or 4 sets, and they'd have to see the Pythons lose out and not go 5 with either of their opponents, because if they go 5 with either Stunners or Freedom, then the Blaze are out. If the Blaze happen to go 5 with the Untouchables or the Tyrants, they're out. Even if they win, they're out. And the Untouchables, like I said, they gotta win out, and they have to hope that the Pythons lose out, which is possible, but the Pythons are so much more improved. And if the Pythons win at least 1 match, the Untouchables are gone. They're done. And the Pythons are dancing into the night. The thing about the Freedom is that they can't finish anywhere below 3rd. So even if the Pythons and the Freedom tie for 3rd place, the Pythons would, let's say realistically, they win in either 3 or 4 sets, and then the Freedom lose in 3 or 4 sets to the Stunners and the Pythons. They can't go anywhere below 3rd place, just because the Pythons at most would have 16 points. And even though the 2 teams would be 5-5, they wouldn't be able to dip below 3rd place. So the Freedom at worst are going to be 3rd, and they're probably either going to get the Stunners or the Tyrants in round 1. They could get the Pythons, realistically, or the Untouchables if the Untouchables make some sort of amazing run. But again, that's going to require the Untouchables winning out. But you also got to remember that the Tyrants are also looking to lock up the number 1 seed in the National Conference. And then for the Stunners, they're also looking to do the same thing as well. And it's all about not losing a whole lot of sets. Because if your set win-loss ratio is worse than the other, then that could prove to be a factor. Because the Stunners and the Tyrants both have the same number of wins, losses, and points. And then it goes to sets won and lost, which the Stunners have a better win-loss set ratio. So I know it's a lot of information, so I know I'm making everyone's head spin, but that's how the NVA works. If it just went to tiebreaker, maybe that would have been better, but I think that would have been a little too easy. I mean, this year is kind of taken on the role of like American sports, just because it's not the first place team from the National Conference plays the fourth place team from the American Conference. It's basically the first place team from the National Conference plays the fourth place team in the National Conference in the first round or the quarterfinals and whatnot. And yes, Adam, the Untouchables basically needed to go according to plan. Otherwise, it's basically game over for them. And yes, there is a chance. And as for the American Conference, the Ramblers and the Wild are both tied atop the American standings. Contrary to popular belief, the Wild are actually the top team in the American Conference, as their set win-loss ratio is much better than the Ramblers by 1 set lost. That's how close it is. So basically, it's going to be a race between the Ramblers and the Wild, depending on who loses less sets this weekend. And that's where everything gets dicey between those two teams. Because if you lose just one more set more than the other team, then basically that could cost you seeding. But for right now, the Wild are atop the American Conference. They have the Utah Stingers and they have the, the Philadelphia Founders, while the Ramblers have the Inland Empire Matadors and the Florida Southern Exposure. Third place in the American Conference is the Utah Stingers, who are 5-3 and have 13 points. They're only 1 game back of the Wild and Ramblers. But here's the thing. The Stingers basically have to go 2-0. The Wild have to go 0-2, and the Ramblers have to go 0-2, which I don't see happening. And no offense to the Exposure and the Matadors, as well as the Founders and the Stingers, but I don't know if it's possible. Like, it's going to be so tough to see the Ramblers losing to the Exposure and Matadors. I mean, the Ramblers just barely lost to the Matadors first go-around, and the other time, they beat Exposure in 4 sets. Though, in that match could have easily gone 5 had it not been for the heroics of Felix Chapman. As for the fourth place team in the American Conference, that happens to be the Florida Southern Exposure, who are 3-5 and have 8 points. Below them are Larry B's Inland Empire Matadors, who are 2-6 and have 6 points. Now, here's the scenario for Exposure and Matadors. If the Exposure win against the Ramblers on Saturday and the Matadors lose to the Ramblers on Friday, Exposure's automatically into the playoffs. But if both teams win on Friday and Saturday, well, in this case, if the Matadors win or lose, or if the Matadors win and the Exposure win, then the two teams will play a win and in match on Sunday. Because the two teams are meeting each other in that match, but the magnitude of that match will be basically win and you're into the playoffs. And if the Matadors win and the Exposure lose on Saturday, then it's still a win and in match. But it's going to all be dependent on how many sets are won and who basically has the number of points. But let's say the Exposure and the Matadors are basically still the same. Let's say realistically, the Ramblers beat both the Exposure and the Matadors. So the two teams are facing one another on Sunday, and it's for the last playoff spot. And let's say the Founders are basically done. Like, The Founders are 1-7 and they only have 3 points. The only way the Founders can make the playoffs is if they win out and the exposure lose out, and then the Matadors beat the exposure in 5 sets, and the Founders win the next tiebreaker after that. So the Founders have a lot of hoops to jump through in order to make the postseason this year. So do we really expect the Founders to beat the Wild and the Stingers? And again, this is no disrespect to any of these NVA teams or the players, but looking at it realistically, the Wild are fighting for the top seed. The Stingers are basically having one more final tune-up. Because no matter who they get between the Wild or the Stingers in the playoffs, that's going to be a very tough matchup. But the Stingers, with their full team, can really do damage. But if they have just 7 players and their head coach happens to be suiting up, then the Stingers are no threat to anybody. And that really did happen in Event 4. Their second match against the Texas Tyrants, it got to the point where they only had 6 players. They needed a 7th player. Their head coach suited up. And if you all remembered in my preview, I put down that Russell Holmes is no longer playing in the NVA. He is now the head coach, the owner, the do-it-all man for the Utah Stingers. And for those that don't know who Russell Holmes is, he is a former Team USA men's volleyball player, and he's a former standout at BYU. Oh, and he's also a real estate agent as well. So if you ever need houses, just call Russell Holmes. And you're in the Utah area. Just please call Russell Holmes. Anyway, but back to the American Conference standings. Exposure Matadors, I'm expecting that to be the win-and-in match. I expect that matchup to be my match of the week, as it's time to get into the matches for this week. So on Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to start, all these matches are going to be at Pacific time standard, because all these matches are being played at Long Beach City College. So Friday at 10 a.m. we have the Las Vegas Ramblers taking on the Inland Empire Matadors. And Cale Henderson popped into the chat room. He said, "Let's go Ramblers. Titletown have another team ready to win again." And Larry B is just saying, "Go Matadors." Well, the Ramblers did lose to the Matadors the first go-around, but the Ramblers, I don't think, had Jalen Penrose to begin with. So, and I don't even think they had their full team. They didn't have Colton Cowell. They didn't have Matt West. They didn't have They didn't have Ryan Manoogian. That was another player that they were missing. So, all in all for the Ramblers, they're a much better team. And we don't know what's the case with the Matadors. Like, they've lost 5 in a row. You have to remember that they went 2-1 in their first 3 matches, and then they lost their next 5. So, when does the free fall end for the Matadors? Does it end somehow in this match, which was their first win of the season, or will it end possibly on Sunday? Or will it not end, and then the Matadors just free fall their way out of the playoffs? It all depends on what happens. But for right now, I would expect the Ramblers to win, just because, again, they're neck and neck with the Wild, and they know they can't afford to lose a set, because if they just lose the one set, that one set that they lose could wind up costing them the number 1 seed, and that could wind up playing the Stingers, and the 2 seed will wind up playing the Stingers, because the Stingers can't finish anywhere below 3rd place. After Ramblers Matadors at 1 p.m., we have Stingers versus Wild. This is a good matchup right here, and this could be a playoff preview for the playoffs, aka Event 6. So for the Stingers and the Wild, these 2 teams are much more different from the first time that they met. The Stingers have a lot more firepower with the Coburn brothers, Shane Holdaway, and a bunch of other players like Pat Paragas, just to name a few. J.J. Rosa has been amazing at the libero position. Meanwhile, for the Wild, Brandon Rattray has been phenomenal. Matt Knigge has been a great addition at the middle blocker position. Joel Auerkamp, Kendall Ratter have all been amazing in terms of the Wild offense. But now these 2 teams face one another, and this could basically be either for the top spot, or it could be a little bit of a playoff preview, as, again, both these teams could face one another in the quarterfinals of the playoffs next week. But it all depends on what happens in this matchup. Again, if the Wild win, they're still alive for clinching the number 1 seed. But if they also win, if the Wild beat the Stingers, then basically they clinch the division outright, and the Stingers basically are locked in as the 3 seed. If the Stingers just so happen to win, then they're still alive for the number 1 seed, depending on what happens with the Ramblers. But again, if the Ramblers... that's a big if. The Ramblers would have to lose out. You got to remember that. But the Stingers would have to run the table. But if the Stingers do win against the Wild, then again, it all depends. It's not going to really matter who has the better record in terms of point value or better record or set win-loss ratio. All it's going to matter is that Stingers and Wild is probably going to be the first-round matchup. And then both these teams are probably going to share the division crown. So all in all, for Stingers Wild, this is probably going to look like a preview, depending on what the Wild do against the Founders the next couple days. Then at 4 p.m., we have the Stunners versus the Freedom. Now, this is a very good matchup right here. Why? Because the Freedom beat the Stunners in the first event. However, the Stunners have gone over a major overhaul in terms of their team. They have Spencer Olivier on their team. They have Calvin Sanborn. They also have Grant Maroki, all 3 of which were Long Beach State men's volleyball players. They also have been finding their groove in terms of their team. Hui Ding has done a great job at the libero position. And Matt Haling is back. I don't know what became of Cody Caldwell. Maybe, I don't know if he's going to be back. But Tanner Woods has been doing great guns for the Stunners. And all in all, and Ignacio Roberts is back. Corey Chavers is back. That's another player that I forgot to mention. Corey Chavers was big for the Stunners in the matchup against the Ramblers. So all in all, for the Stunners, they have their entire roster for the most part. And then for the Freedom, it's all going to depend on if they're going to have their full roster. If they can have their full roster, then we could see a barn burner with the Stunners and the Freedom. If not, then expect the Stunners to win. Because if they win, they clinch the division outright. And more importantly, they're still in contention for the top seed. Also, the Freedom would be locked in as the 3 seed. Unless the... No, I think that even if the Freedom were to lose... Even if the Tyrants were to lose out, the Freedom would basically have to run the table. Like, if the Freedom want to move up in the standings, they basically have to run the table and hope that the Stunners or the Tyrants lose out. Which, again, that just doesn't seem likely. But you never know. And even if the Freedom move up to 2, they're still probably going to get Tyrants or Stunners in the first round. And that's a very tough matchup right there. And then closing out Friday's matches, we have the Chicago Untouchables versus the Los Angeles Blaze. If Adam Carnick, if you're still listening, you might want to pay attention to this. If the Blaze in Untouchables go 5 sets, and the Blaze, for starters, if this matchup goes 5 sets, the Blaze are automatically eliminated from playoff contention because they would only get 2 points, and they need to pretty much get the full 3 points on both days. And then for the Untouchables, they would still have to win out. Like, if they lose one match, they're done. I'm fairly certain. And then another thing is that if they, let's say they win the Untouchables win both their matches in 5 sets. If the Pythons manage to get 1 point, and the Untouchables get 4 points, then the Pythons... Oh wait, no. The Untouchables would still have the better they would still have the better record overall. But all in all, for the Untouchables, this is basically their first stop in terms of trying to win out. If the Untouchables basically win out, then they're in. But they also have to hope that the Pythons lose out, which would be just crazy. And I don't know if that's likely, but you never know. But the Blaze are basically playing for pride, and they're basically just fighting for whatever little playoff hope that they have. They did get their first win of the season, and I will say this about the Blaze. So I guaranteed their win over the Philadelphia Founders, or at least one of their last 3 matches prior to event number 4. I know the Untouchables do not have Andrew Kohut, but I do know that they have some other good players. I will say this: if the Untouchables are not, up to snuff, because you have to remember they did not play in Event 4. There is that rust factor. If they're missing a few other guys, and the Blaze still have Seamus McDonough setting to the likes of Charles Belvin and to Daniel Matheny and Andrew Dubé and a bunch of the other guys that the Blaze had in Event 4, I think the Blaze could actually take down the Untouchables. And that's not just me saying that to be crazy. I really think the Blaze can beat the Untouchables. Because the Blaze don't really have much to play for, and their path to the playoffs, let's all be honest, it's a very tough path to the playoffs. They have 4 points, and they basically have to run the table and hope that the Pythons basically lose out, and they don't go 5, and then the Blaze wins the next tiebreaker between the Pythons and the Blaze. And then that would be how they get into the playoffs. But you also got to remember that this is a Blaze team that basically everyone counted out and everyone doubted. So the Blaze are basically out to fight for their playoff lives, and they're basically out to prove that the first matchup between the Blaze and the Untouchables was basically, them just seeing the match slip through their fingers. And you also got to remember that the Blaze have not really had a full roster in most of their events. Except for Event 4, which, again, you saw them winning in 4 sets over the Founders, and then you saw them you saw them losing to the Pythons, but being very competitive. Then we jump over to Saturday's matches. At 9 a.m., we have the New Jersey Freedom taking on the Puerto Rico Pythons. So this is the big test for the Pythons. Can they show to everyone that they've improved drastically? They have beaten the Untouchables, the Blaze, and the Exposure. Those are good wins, but they're not the greatest wins, which they're all against sub-500 teams. If they can get one win over the Stunners or the Freedom, I'll say this about the Pythons: they could be a team that no one wants to play come playoff time, and that would be huge. But this is basically the true test of the Pythons' growth. If they could win at least one match, then they are ready for the playoffs. Jair Santiago is obviously an amazing player, but he needs all the help he can get. But Arnaldo Torres, Ishmael Alamar, Ricky Olea, I want to say. It's either Ricky Vega. I think Olea is on the Matadors. Either way, Ricky Vega, all those players need to give the Pythons the boost that they need. And they need to make sure that Jair Santiago is not playing Superman. Also, Jose Pacheco has been doing phenomenal at the libero position. And the Pythons are really showing that they do belong in the playoffs. And that's going to be very amazing to see everyone from that division make the playoffs. Everyone from the National Coastal Division make the playoffs. Hence the word if, the Pythons can hold on and basically not slip up. Because if they manage to slip up and for some odd reason the Untouchables do the unthinkable, then that would basically be flabbergasting. By the way, that matchup starts at 9 a.m. The next matchup actually starts at 11:30 a.m., so it's an earlier start time as we have 5 matches being played in this day, as this one is actually... The next match is actually the Florida Southern Exposure taking on the Las Vegas Ramblers. Now, like I said, this is a big matchup for the Exposure and a big weekend for the Exposure. They are in the driver's seat in terms of wins and losses. If they were to beat the Ramblers and the Matadors were to lose to the Ramblers, then the Exposure get in. If the Exposure and Matadors lose, then the two have to play a win-and-in game on Sunday. If the two teams both lose on Friday, Friday for the Matadors and Saturday for the Exposure, Then the two teams play the win and in game on Sunday. The two teams play their matchup on Sunday regardless, but again, the magnitude of that match is going to be so big. As for Exposure Ramblers, basically, this is the match of can the Exposure bring their full team and bring out the full potential in their team against a Ramblers team who just continues to get bigger and better in terms of not just their numbers, but their size and their athleticism. So we'll see what happens, but all in all, again, I would expect the Ramblers to win, especially since every match and every set to them is precious, but time will tell. Then after Exposure Ramblers at 2 p.m., we have Blaze versus Tyrants. So the Blaze Tyrants, it's basically the best team in the conference, or one of the best teams in the conference versus the worst team in the conference. But don't go telling the Blaze that, because the last time the two teams faced one another, the Blaze took a set off the Tyrants, though the Tyrants did not have their full team. But I will say this, the Tyrants should be a whole lot better with Austin Matautia still in the fold. Gianluca Grasso is back in the fold. Ryan Mather should be back after missing Event 4. Jake Langlois is still doing great things. I want to say his name is Vekas Lewin. He's also doing great things. And it's an interesting battle at the center position. You have Tanner Maxwell and Chris Hall battling it out. And sometimes Mauro Grasso will sometimes shuffle the two setters if one is not up to snuff in a match. It's kind of like a quarterback change. If a quarterback is just struggling or he's hurt or something like that, you switch him out. But Blaze Tyrants, the Blaze are going to need to come out blazing hot, see what I did there, as they're going to have to basically do the unthinkable and take down the Tyrants. If they do so, then they still have a pulse for their playoff spot. But you also got to remember they have to take down the Untouchables too. Which, if they don't, then this match is just nothing but pride. And then at 4:30 p.m., we have the San Diego Wild taking on the Philadelphia Founders. Basically, this matchup this could be the crowning jewel of if the Wild get the number 1 seed or not. Depending on what happens with Ramblers and their matchups against the Matadors and the Exposure, I can already tell that the Wild are going to have all their eyes on the Ramblers on Friday and on Saturday. It's going to be a big-time match, and the Wild just can't underestimate the Founders. The Founders are basically playing with house money here, and for the Founders, if for some reason everything still goes their way, they still need to basically win out. They need the Exposure to lose out, which would also include the Matadors beating the Exposure in 5 sets on Sunday, and then the Exposure losing to Ramblers in 3 or 4 sets, and then also the Matadors losing in 3 or 4 sets to the Ramblers, then the Founders still have a chance. But for the Founders to have any sort of hope of trying to clinch any sort of playoff spot, everything needs to go perfectly for them. So there's that matchup right there. And then at 7 p.m., we have the NVA All-Star match, which I will get into in a little bit. But that is basically when the NVA All-Star match will be. It's just that little match. There's not going to be like a target challenge, or there's not going to be like some other festivities or whatnot. But we'll see. Then on Sunday, to conclude the regular season, we have at 11:30 a.m. I'm guessing the reason why all the matches are now moved up, or this first match is at 11:30 a.m., is because I guess they want to give the players more time to sleep and rest because of all of everything being rushed last night, or the crew being basically having to do a whole lot of things and whatnot. Hopefully everything does get streamed this weekend. I can't guarantee that, but I'm fairly certain we're going to see everything being live streamed, unlike last event. But as for the first match on Sunday, we have Matadors versus the Exposure. Again, depending on what happens Friday with the Matadors and Saturday with the Exposure, depends on if this matchup will be a win and in match. If the Exposure win and the Matadors lose prior to Sunday, then this match has no meaning, and this is just a final tune-up match for the Exposure. If for some reason the Matadors win and the Exposure lose, then it's still a win and in match. But the only thing that prevents this bit from being win and in is Exposure winning on Saturday and Matadors losing on Friday. Then at 2 p.m., we have the Philadelphia Founders taking on the Utah Stingers. This is most likely going to be a final tune-up match for the Stingers, as unless the Wild somehow manage to slip up as well as the Ramblers, the Stingers are basically playing for third or second. But we'll see what happens with the Stingers. Again, they have a great roster, and they do have potential. And honestly, I could still see them being a potential dark horse of winning it all. But it all depends on if they could bring everybody. Again, they just cannot have 7 players. If they have 7 players available for the playoffs, then they're all but screwed. And that's not trying to be mean or anything. That's really an uphill climb. Then at 4:30 p.m., we have the Puerto Rico Pythons versus the Stunana, aka the Orange County Stunners. So for the Pythons, again, it's another test for them as they play one of the teams that beat them, and Jair Santiago plays his former team, which, if you remember, Santiago played on the Stunners prior to playing on the Pythons, and it's going to be let's see how much the Pythons have really grown. And I think they can battle the Stunners. I mean, the two teams did battle one another to a 5-set match, the first event, but that was back in Event 1, and the Stunners were missing so many key players, but so were the Pythons. So all in all, for the Pythons and the Stunners, this is going to be a great matchup, and Event 5 is basically proving that you are much better than you were in Event 1, and every player on your team that wasn't available in Event 1 or so is now available for the time being. But we'll see. And then to close out the regular season, we have the Texas Tyrants versus the Chicago Untouchables. So depending on what happens with the Untouchables depends on what happens with this matchup. If the Untouchables win and the Pythons are basically have not won, if the Pythons have lost out and the Untouchables beat the Blaze, then this could be a win and in match for the Untouchables. And then for the Tyrants, this is basically, if you win, you're most likely still in contention for the number 1 seed, depending on what happened with the Stunners in the previous 2 days, or in the previous 2 matches. But if for the Tyrants, if they didn't manage to, do their part to be the number 1 seed, and they're locked in as the 2 seed, this is basically their final tune-up match where they don't want to have their players being rusty and whatnot. So all in all, for the Tyrants, this is basically, I wouldn't say target practice, and on paper they have a very favorable schedule to possibly being the number 1 seed, as opposed to the Stunners, who have the Freedom, who beat them the first time around, and then you also have the Pythons, which took them to 5. So the Stunners have a very tough path to being the number 1 seed, but all in all, it's still going to be any given day, as I'm going to read you Adam Karnick's little bold prediction. The Untouchables will not only appear in the next match, they will win it. I mean, it's realistically possible that they can win their next match against the Blaze, but if the Untouchables are still missing some key players and the Blaze play like they did in event number 4, the Blaze could actually come out on top, and that would not be surprising to anybody. And then he also says the Untouchables shall be victorious. That mustache will rule the day. He is referring to Will Ragland. And it reminds me of the one comment that someone made saying justice for Will Ragland. I'm not going to get into one of the comments, or where that comment came from, but all in all, he is referring to Will Ragland. Oh my god. Adam Karnick only Adam Karnick would refer to Will Ragland's amazing mustache. Oh my goodness. That is just amazing and funny. So, alright, that's going to basically do it for the NVA matches for event number 5. Alright, before I get on into a commercial break, I have one more bit of NVA news, and that just so happens to be the NVA All-Stars being released. So, again, like I said, I am your one-stop shop for all things NVA news, and the starters for the American and National Conference were released yesterday, as the American Conference All-Stars consist of, in the outside hitter position, Felix Chapman of the Las Vegas Ramblers, Colton Cowell of the Las Vegas Ramblers, Zach Meyer of the Florida Southern Exposure, and a to-be-determined player, which is going to be in the fan-selected category. Then in the middle blockers, you have Uchenna Ofoa of the San Diego Wild, Kevin Vaz of the Las Vegas Ramblers, and Matt Carnegie of the San Diego Wild. There's also another to-be-determined fan selection player from the middle blocker category. Then the setters, you have Matt West from the Las Vegas Ramblers, Christian Ventura of the Inland Empire Matadors, and an alternate would be Gert Lisha of the Las Vegas Ramblers. Then in terms of opposites, you have Jalen Penrose of the Las Vegas Ramblers and Brandon Rattray of the San Diego Wild. Then in terms of the liberos, you have J.J. Rosa of the Utah Stingers and Matt Primrose of the Florida Southern Exposure. And the head coach for the American Conference will be Miguel Monterola of the Las Vegas Ramblers. So that is basically your American Conference All-Stars. Now for the National Conference All-Stars. That will consist of, at the outside hitter position, starting off with Jared Ray from the New Jersey Freedom, Jake Langlois of the Texas Tyrants, and Spencer Olivier of the Orange County Stunners. Another player will be determined via fan selection. And then the middle blockers, you have Nick West from the Orange County Stunners, Matt Seifert from the New Jersey Matt Seifert from the New Jersey Freedom, and then Shane Beamer from the Orange County Stunners. And once again, another player will be selected via fan selection. And then for the setters, you have Ignacio Roberts of the Orange County Stunners and Matt Elias of the New Jersey Freedom. Then for the opposites, you have Ryan Mather of the Texas Tyrants and Jair Santiago of the Puerto Rico Pythons. And then for the liberos, you have Jose Malero of the Texas Tyrants and Hui Ding of the Orange County Stunners. And then the head coach of the National Conference All-Stars will be Matt Prosser. So that's pretty much your National Conference All-Stars. Now let's get on into the information for how to vote for the final alternate player, or for the final players of the National and American Conference All-Stars. So you have to go to the NVA's Instagram page, and you have to vote for these players. So today, they kicked off their voting information with the outside hitters from the National Conference. So the nominees are Austin Matau-Tia from the Texas Tyrants, Corey Chavers from the Orange County Stunners, and Tanner Woods from the Orange County Stunners. So basically, whoever garners the most votes will be voted on as the player that is into the All-Star break, or into the All-Star game. And currently, right now, as of this recording, 51% have Austin Matau-Tia being voted in as the All-Star in terms of the outside hitters of the National Conference. Corey Chavers has 31% of the fan votes, and Tanner Woods has 18%. So if you're listening live, you still have time to vote for who will be an All-Star. I want to say this whole thing is a whole 24-hour voting poll, and as of right now, 8 hours have passed by. But all in all, that is pretty much that for all of the All-Stars. These teams were selected by votes from National Conference teams and league personalities and statisticians, not including myself, unfortunately, which sadly, they did not get this out to me, and that kind of makes me a little bummed out that I didn't get a chance to vote. I'm part of the NVA too. I mean, I talk about the NVA on this podcast. So, why they gotta leave me out? Anyway, so that is that for all things NVA, and that's pretty much that for the NVA portion of the show. We're going to take ourselves a quick little break. When we come back, we will be discussing the VNL on the men's and women's side, and then after that, we will be discussing the AVP, and we'll discuss a little bit of NCAA women's volleyball news. So keep it locked here. You are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, sports fans. It's me, your boy Larry B, and I want to walk you through the world of sports. No, not just the mainstream major TV deal type sports, although those are important too. But let me be your guide through your journey of all sports, from college to the pros, the minors, and everything in between. Each week, we are talking sports galore with true diehards just like you from a hardcore fan's perspective that's sure to quench your thirst around leagues you may know all too well and some you may even discover here. That's right, sports fans. If you love sports of all kinds, enjoy hearing amazing sports stories, and respect all sports because you know how difficult any of them can be to play or compete in, then this is your show. Join me, your boy Larry B, on the defining moment each week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports, and let the sports come to you.
Hello, ladies and sinners. Hello, sports fans around the world. Hello, IE Sports family. This is Cale Henderson, the host of IE Vegas, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio. If you folks are interested in sports in the Vegas area, if you're wanting to have a blast for 1 hour, every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is a show built for the Vegas sports fans, where we feature the Las Vegas Raiders, the Las Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Aces, and the University of Las Vegas, Nevada Rebels. Hopefully, fingers crossed, MLB team coming soon. Either way, if you folks are looking to have a blast for 1 hour each and every week, tune in Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you folks are interested in Vegas sports news, go to our Twitter, at SinCities_IESR, and you can speak with me, the host, Cale Henderson, at Cale_Henderson on Twitter, at any time. Be happy to reply. Always want to reach out to our fans. Again, the Sin City Sports Show, presented by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernick, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely do check out our amazing shows such as The Defining Moment with Larry B, Sin City Sports with Cale Henderson, which goes on every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, and Chi-Town Weekly with Adam Karnick, which goes on every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, which primarily goes on 1 hour before this show. So definitely do check out all of those shows along with our other shows. We have shows dedicated to motorsports. We have shows located in the Miami area, the Denver area. The list goes on and on. iSports Radio is going to continue to grow as we're out to make ourselves a big household name for everybody. So with that being said, let's get on into the second half of this show. Let's jump on into some VNL action, as I unfortunately missed the men's action. Because you remember last week I had the 200th episode and I did not expect talking about anything volleyball related. I did talk about the NVA, but that was kind of where the buck stopped. So there was that. So currently the standings are as follows. Japan is in first place with 8 wins, 0 losses, and 22 points. The U.S. is 7-1 with 21 points. Brazil is 6-2 with 19 points. Slovenia is also 6-2 with 18 points. And Poland is in 5th place with 6-2 with 14 points. Argentina is 5-3 with 16 points. Italy is 5-3 with 15 points. And Netherlands is 4-4 with 14 points. Serbia is also 4-4 with 11 points. France, last year's champion, is 3-5 with 9 points. Iran is 2-6 with 8 points. Cuba is also 2-6 with 5 points, as well as Canada, though their set win-loss ratio is worse. China is also 2-6 with 5 points, though their set win-loss ratio is just a little bit worse than Canada's. And Bulgaria is 1-7 with 6 points, and Germany is dead last with a 1-7 record, and are having 4 points to go along with it. So as for the U.S., long story short for the U.S., they basically ran the table with their matches, as they won their first match against Serbia in 4 sets. They dropped the first set 25-22, but wound up winning the next 3 sets, 25-19, 25-19, and 25-21. So that was a pretty decent win. Then against China, they beat them in straight sets, 28-26, 25-22, and 25-18. Then against Iran, they swept them 25-22, 25-18, and 25-23. I got to see a little of that Iran match, as, surprisingly enough, my soon-to-be roommate from that event was live streaming the match on his iPad. So I gotta give a shout to Langdon. I unfortunately did not get his last name, but Langdon gets a shout out because he was live streaming the match. And then against Poland, the U.S. swept them 25-22, 25-18, and 25-19 to end off round 2 of the VNL pool play matches. A perfect 4-0, as they are all alone in second place, as the VNL now takes them to Anaheim. So for this event, some of these teams will be playing in Anaheim, while the other teams will be heading, I do not know where the other teams are going to be playing. I think they're going to be playing, I made a mistake, actually. So I actually thought that, Japan and China were facing one another in Anaheim as well. I thought all of the VNL matches were going to be held in China, but unfortunately I got corrected, and I was a complete doo-doo brain, and I felt silly for making that mistake. So, sorry. So sadly, I was wrong, and I hate to break this to those that wanted to see Japan in the VNL at the Anaheim Convention Center. You're not going to be able to see them. So I'm sorry, that is not going to happen, but it is what it is, and hey, it's all good. So basically life goes on. That's what I'm trying to say is that you'll one day see Japan. One day. But as for the U.S., they will be playing their matches in the Anaheim Convention Center, which was just hosting the Stunners versus Wild exhibition match, which I think was a great event. And it's a great venue to have. Now, how are they going to have seating? I do not know. But I'm sure the VNL will figure it out. I wish I could be there. I will just say this. If you are in the Anaheim area or the Southern California area, please do go to these VNL matches, and I'm sure you'll be able to get discounts when it comes to this. So we'll see what happens. So there's that. But all in all, I actually do want to basically get the correct location of where Japan is going to be playing China. Japan is going to be playing China. So yeah. So yeah, they're heading to the Philippines for week 3. So wah. And yeah, I even got corrected by Volleyball World. They told me that Japan and China will be heading to the Philippines for week 3. So Japan and China and a few other teams will be heading to Philippines, while some of the other teams will be heading to the Anaheim Convention Center. I'm sorry if I can't know the difference between where some of these teams are playing. I really do apologize if I'm an absent-minded professor. So we're all human. So don't judge me or anything. But Japan kicks off VNL play against China tomorrow, and then Friday they have Netherlands. Saturday they have Italy, and then Sunday they close out with Poland. So looking at Japan's matches at a glance, China is 14th, and then Netherlands is 8th, which Netherlands is going to try to either improve its standing or secure a playoff spot, which is basically the same thing, or to make sure they don't fall out of the top 8. Because, well, for starters, if you fall out of the top 8, you're gone. And then for Japan, Italy is 7th in the standings, which Italy has had its ups and downs. For them being a young team, they are still rather impressive. And then Japan closes out with Poland, which Poland is 5th in the standings. So I imagine Japan is going to get really tested in the latter matches, or as their matches basically progress. Just like I mentioned in their week 2 of the VNL pool play matches, their matchups were getting progressively tougher. I mean, they had to go 4 with Canada, which obviously is a good team on a yearly basis. They handled Cuba quite well, but then they had to go 5 with Brazil and Argentina, but they came out on top. Both matchups, they almost got reverse swept in, and against Brazil, they actually needed to go overtime in set 5, but they wound up winning that 5th set 18-16. So for Japan, I mean, they're still a really good team, but they're not invincible. I'm just going to say that right there. But I will respect them and say that they really are playing some darn good volleyball. I just wish that they would have the U.S. on their docket, because do you know how many fans would flock to the Anaheim Convention Center and see that matchup? It would be a barn burner. And speaking of the U.S., that's a perfect segue to go into the U.S.'s matches. So the U.S. kicks off the last leg of VNL play on Wednesday, July 5th, against Cuba. Now, I saw on the USA website that it was going to be at 6:30 p.m., but now I'm seeing it's at 8:30 p.m. I don't know what to believe. I actually had plans of attending the USA-Cuba match, but if it's going to be at 8:30, do I really want to go? And if I'm going to have to pay to get in, do I really want to go? Probably not. Now, if the U.S. was playing someone a little bit higher in the standings, I'd maybe go to it, just because Cuba is 12th in the standings. Like, if the U.S. was playing Slovenia or Brazil or Poland, Argentina, any of that sort of opponent, I would totally go to it, even if it meant I would be dead tired the the day after. But I will say this, and even if it meant spending a little bit of a pretty penny, but I will just say that the U.S., they do have a chance to be the number 1 seed, and I think it's going to be a great homecoming for them playing on American soil. And that's something you don't really get to really see a whole lot in terms of the VNL. Then on Friday, July 7th, which is the same day as the NVA, I'm just going to also say this. The NVA picked a horrible weekend to have Event 5 because they have the same their 3-day weekend falls on the same 3-day weekend as the VNL. Meaning I have to choose between either going to USA Canada, or not USA Canada, USA Cuba or not. Because I'm not going to miss Event 5 of the NVA. I just am not. So I just wish the NVA could have pushed Event 5 to next week as opposed to this week. But beggars can't be choosers, I guess. Speaking of Argentina, the U.S. plays Argentina on Friday, July 7th, which Argentina is 6th in the standings. They're going to try to either improve their standing or not fall out of the top 8, because only the top 8 makes it to the knockout round. And basically, if you're out of the top 8, you're in, I want to say 9 through 16 plays for relegation. I'm not entirely certain of that sort of thing, but I want to say that is the case. Then on Saturday, July 8th, the U.S. plays last year's VNL champion France. Now, that is a very good matchup right there just because, well, France is, although they're not the greatest opponent, France is going to be clawing and scratching their way to trying to make the playoffs. However, the U.S. knows if they want that top seed, they really, really need to take care of business. And also, if they want to avoid playing Brazil, which I think could be a little bit of a matchup boo-boo for them, I think they need that top seed because I feel Brazil might be a tougher matchup than everyone thinks they can be. I'm just saying, U.S.-Brazil is always a barn burner in anything volleyball related. Y'all don't want to pay attention to me, but I'm out here preaching to the choir. And then the U.S. closes out VNL pool play on Sunday, July 9th against Bulgaria. That matchup will be between the second best team in the VNL pool play standings and the second worst team in the VNL pool play standings. So for the U.S., realistically, they have a somewhat favorable schedule. The France one I think is a little bit of a trap game, but Argentina is their toughest matchup. If the U.S. could play their cards right, they could be the top seed going into the knockout round, aka the top 8. But all in all for the U.S., they just have to take care of their side of the net. They have a very talented team this year, filled with returners and some newcomers, but it's mostly returning veterans. And obviously, John Speraw has done an excellent job leading the team, and I really wish I could see them on Wednesday, but all in all, we'll see what happens. Maybe I can pull some strings to go to that match, but I can already tell that this matchup is going to be a pretty penny. It's going to cost quite a bit of money. And if I was going to this event for free or as a member of the media, maybe, hence the word maybe, I would go to this. But I have work tomorrow, even though it's at 3:15, so I just don't see it being in the cards for me. And then I also have to finish packing when it comes to my NVA stuff. And then I also have to finish doing articles, so that's just Teran stuff happening on why he cannot make the USA-Cuba match, which I wish I could, but I can't. But we'll see what happens. Alright, so that's that for the VNL on the men's side. That's basically the Week 2 recap and the event, or the Week 3 preview. So jumping on over to the women's side of things. So the women's side of things just concluded last week. And basically, this was being played in South Korea. And honestly, this did not disappoint. There was a lot of amazing... I'm sorry, it wasn't in South Korea. Actually, no, it was in South Korea. I want to say it was. But all in all, the women's VNL pool play did finish up everything as, yeah. No, it was in South Korea. I'm sorry, y'all. So it was in Suwon, Korea. So, yeah. It was in Suwon, Korea, and which is basically South Korea and whatnot. So the first matchup for the U.S., they actually played Poland. So this is the battle of the top two teams in the VNL pool play standings. So in the first set, Poland really let the U.S. have it in that set, as they took that first set 25-17. But then the U.S. stormed back to take in that second set 25-15. So battle of the set-heavy runs in terms of the first two sets. Then in set number 3, Poland led 20-18, but then the U.S. was able to come back and win 27-25. Then the U.S. actually had to face a couple of set points against Poland, and then they actually had a few match points under their belt, but Poland managed to squeak away, winning set number 4, 30-28. Then in set 5, it got really dicey. I want to say the U.S. was down by like 4 or 5 points. I want to say maybe 7-3 or so. But then the U.S. just kept clawing their way back. And even though they didn't really lead a whole lot this set, they eventually came up big when it mattered most. And they even dodged a match point attempt from Poland at 14-13. And they eventually wound up winning the next 3 points. And that's how they were able to beat Poland in set 5, 16-14. And they were able to basically jump ahead for the VNL pool play lead. And I think all those past 5-set matches really prepared the U.S. quite well. Then the day after, the U.S. showed no signs of a letdown as they swept Bulgaria 25-15, 25-17, and 25-17. Then on Saturday, we had the U.S. beating Germany in 4 sets. The U.S. won the first set 25-22, but lost the second set 25-18. Then the U.S. won the third set 25-22, and then the fourth set, the U.S. just stormed away, winning that fourth set 25-13. Now, at this point, the U.S. was pretty much in control of their own destiny. Poland was done with its matches. They finished 10-2, and they have more points than the U.S. Now, the U.S., all they just need to do is win their final matchup, and boom, they're the top seed of the knockout round. Well, they faced China, and I had this weird feeling that this was going to be a very tough matchup. So the first set, the U.S. took the first set against China 25-18, but the second set, the U.S. dropped it 25-19 to China. It kind of showed that China was a really good team. Then the third set, 25-19 was the score that the U.S. won by, as they were one set away from the top seed in the knockout round. But China wound up taking that fourth set 25-20, and just like that, they went 5 sets again. But unlike the previous match against Poland, the U.S. did not win the fifth set, as China won the fifth set 15-8. They really hammered the U.S. It seems like when the U.S. does not get off to a fast start in set 5, they are D-O-O-M-E-D. Doomed. As the U.S. unfortunately lost that match, and more importantly, they lost the top seed of the VNL knockout round, as Poland finishes atop the VNL pool play standings with a 10-2 record and 29 points. The U.S. finished 10-2, but with 28 points. Behind them was Turkey with a 9-3 record. They also had 29 points. China finished 8-4 with 24 points. Italy finished 8-4 with 21 points. Brazil finished 7-4 with 21 points. Well, it didn't really matter. No, their record did not get updated, but they finished 8-4 with 24 points. So I think they should be ranked higher than Italy. So I don't know what's going on here, but I'm just saying. Anyway, so Brazil probably finished higher than Italy in terms of that regard. Japan finished 7th, as they finished 7-5 with 21 points. And Germany finished 7-5 with 20 points, as they finished 8th. So you're probably wondering, who's last year's champion? That would happen to be Serbia. And Serbia managed to, unfortunately, hence the word unfortunately, not make the top 8 as they're out. As sadly, Serbia lost 3 out of their 4 matches in the last leg of the VNL pool play, as they lost to Turkey in 4 sets, which, I mean, Turkey's a really good team, so it's not ultimately expected. But then on Saturday, they got swept by Poland. Now, that's kind of also somewhat expected, just because Poland is good. But this was the real stunner right here. Canada eventually finished 10th in the standings. They actually beat Serbia in 5 sets. Now, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong matches again. So, Serbia actually won 3 of their last 4 matches. They actually lost. Serbia beat China in 4 sets on Wednesday, and then they beat Germany in 4 sets on Thursday. But then Friday, this was the real stunner. They lost to the Dominican Republic in 5 sets. Now, you're probably wondering, well, where's the Dominican Republic? They were 6-6, and they finished 11th in the standings. So, Serbia losing to the Dominican Republic was what really hurt Serbia going into the final match. And even though Serbia beat Bulgaria in 5 sets, it still was not enough, as Serbia sadly just was too much behind the 8 ball to catch up with the rest of the VNL pack. So, sadly, last year's VNL champion on the women's side is out. Just like on the men's side, France was out as well, so... Well, France isn't officially out, but they're on the verge of being out. So, sadly for Serbia, they are out. But you have to give it up for Dominican Republic. They played spoiler, and sadly, Serbia just could not come up big. Had they won, they would have probably booted out Germany. And that could have been an interesting matchup in the first round. But that is not the case, and sadly, Serbia is on the outside looking in. They're the first team out in terms of the teams that did not make it. So that's got to be such a heartbreaker for Serbia, which, I mean, it sucks, but hey, what can you do? It is what it is sometimes. That's sometimes just how the ball bounces, and that's all you can really just do is throw your hands up in the air and say, we just weren't the better team. And every team goes through this. So that is pretty much that for pool play. Now it's on to the knockout round, as the knockout round will be taking place in Arlington, Texas. So if you are in the Arlington, Texas area, or anywhere in the Texas area, please do support the VNL. I highly encourage it. So the quarterfinals will be Poland versus Germany, China versus Brazil, Italy versus Turkey, and the U.S. versus Japan. Now, all those matchups are really, 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 really good matchups. You've got Germany-Poland, which Germany has vastly improved, and Poland is basically the top of the food chain. Then China and Brazil, that is an instant classic right there, because both those teams are always good for the most part, and they always have good teams in terms of the Olympics, especially Brazil. And then Italy-Turkey. Italy kind of got off to a rocky start, but then they picked it up, and then Turkey always is talented. So Italy is kind of in that mode where can they really prove themselves against Turkey? And then the U.S.-Japan is basically a rematch of pool play. The U.S. lost in 5 sets to Japan, and now they're going to have to basically prove themselves. And this is kind of a tricky matchup just because, well, Japan beat them, and you never know what kind of team anyone is going to bring. Like, you could probably be, like, the 7th worst team in this, or the 7th best team in this whole quarterfinals could be the best team in this whole shebang. I mean, look at what Serbia did last year. They were the 8th best team, and they managed to upset the U.S., which was the top seed in the quarterfinals, and they wound up running the table, and they wound up basically being the VNL champion. So any of these teams could win it all in terms of the knockout round. And I honestly don't think that there is one bad team in this knockout round, which I really think can be a great thing. So July 12th is basically the quarterfinals. July 14th is the semifinals. And then I want to say the 16th will be the final, is the championship match, as well as the, the bronze medal match. But all in all, for the women's VNL championship, it all comes down to this. Everything is bigger in Texas, just like the championships. So we'll see what happens going forward. But that is basically going to do it for the VNL portion of the show. I really think that we're in for a barn burner in terms of the VNL Women's Championship or the VNL Women's Knockout Round. I just like to call it the Knockout Round just because I feel it's the more appropriate name. They call it the Championships, but I think the only time you should call it Championships is the finals. Alright, but that's that for the VNL portion of the show. Let's jump to some AVP. Yes, there was some AVP that happened, and I am very foolish for forgetting about this tournament. I said the next tournament in terms of the AVP was in Hermosa Beach after the Virginia Beach Open. That is not the case. It was actually the Denver Open held in Denver, Colorado. So, yeah, that was my bad. Sorry, y'all. So, we'll jump to some AVP action. As on the women's side, this was basically another one of those interesting tournaments. They had pool play, and then some of the better teams advanced to the bracket play, or I wouldn't say the single I think this was single elimination. It was single elimination because pool play, you basically could lose once, but if you lose again, you're gonzo. So basically, the bracket play, or the playoffs, was what was, the point of no return. You lose, you're done. You win, you move on. So in the final, I'm just going to skip to the championship. We had the top two seeds, Teran Rodriguez and Savvy Simo, the top seed, taking on the number 2 seed, Haley Harward and Kelly Kalinsky. So, for Teran Rodriguez and Savvy Simo, people call her Savannah, but I will always refer to her as Savvy. She likes to be called Savvy, and I will refer to her as Savvy. Don't you forget about it. So, in pool play, Tony and Savvy beat Natalie Miaskowski and Nikki Ranking 21-12 and 21-9. And then, also in pool play, Rodriguez and Simo defeated Katie Hogan and Katie Piles 22-20 and 21-14. Then the playoffs in single elimination bracket play. The two defeated Megan Gebhard and Caitlin Mullaney 21-10 and 21-18. Then in the quarterfinals, they got a little bit of a scare as they had to go through with Brooke Bauer and Katie Horton, aka Florida State's finest. However, they came out on top, winning 21-11, 19-21, and 15-8. Then the semifinals, Rodriguez and Simo defeated Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn 25-19 and 25-18, and that's how they got to the final. And then as for the other finalists, Kelly Kalinsky and Haley Harward, their day consisted, their path to the finals consisted of beating Elena Chacon and Kylie DeBerg in pool play 21-13 and 21-15. And they also beat Jolani Hodel and Callie York in pool play 21-17 and 21-18. Then in playoffs, in the first round, Harward and Kalinsky outlasted Maddie Shields, the former Pepperdine and USC Beach volleyball player, and Lydia Smith 21-16, 15-21, and 15-11. Then in the quarterfinals, Harward and Kalinsky defeated Deanna Kraft and Zana Muno 21-19 and 21-14. And then in the quarterfinals, Harward and Kalinsky beat Carly Skogit and Jaden Whitmarsh 21-19 and 21-19 to advance to the championship match. So in the first set, Harward and Kolinsky took the first set against Rodriguez and Simo 21-15. Then Harward and Kolinsky actually led 16-12 in set number 2. And I'm thinking, all right, well, it looks like Harward and Kolinsky are going to end this one. No. Tony Rodriguez had that inner tiger in her, and Savvy Simo had that inner Bruin in her Bruin, as they managed to tie the setup at 16 apiece. And they eventually took the second set 22-20, forcing a third set. But it was Harward and Kolinsky that came out on top, winning set 3 15-9, and winning their first AVP tournament as a pair. As I was very impressed by Harward and Kolinsky. They only dropped 2 sets all tournament. And honestly, I know they went 6-0, but I will just say this. Them winning their first tournament means that they have some good team chemistry going. And I really think that those two can be a really good pair for the AVP going forward. And me personally, who covered Haley Harward in college and a semi-official Haley's buddy, aka part of her fan club. Not really, though, but kind of, sort of. I am kind of proud of Haley Harward for how she was able to win her first AVP tournament with a new partner in Kelly Kolinsky. And she's come a long way. She played college volleyball at Long Beach State and then eventually played at USC, where she wound up winning 2 national championships. So that is that for Haley Harward and Kelly Kolinsky winning on the women's side. Now on the men's side, basically I'm just going to skip to the finals when it comes to the playoffs. So the finals consisted of Billie Allen and Allison Cerruti taking on Hagen Smith and Logan Weber. So jumping over to the top bracket. So in the first match of their little path to the finals, Billie Allen and Allison Cerruti actually outlasted Ryan Ierna and Diego Perez 16-21, 21-14, and 15-12. So kind of a little bit of a scare there, but Allen and Cerruti both managed to advance to the quarterfinals. Then in the quarterfinals, they took down Travis Meewerter and Jake Urrutia. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names. And this was on Sunday. Billie Allen and Allison Cerruti won 21-16 and 21-18 to advance to the semifinals. Then in the semifinals, they took down Michael Grossell and Nathan Yang 21-11 and 21-15 to advance to the final. As for Smith and Weber, they actually upset the number 3 seed John Hyden and Bill Kolinsky, who is the husband of Kelly Kolinsky, 21-14 and 24-22. Then in the in the first matchup, before that upset occurred, Smith and Weber took down TJ Jerko and Andrew Holman 21-10 and 21-19. Then Smith and Weber upset John Hyden and Bill Kolinsky 21-14 and 24-22. Then the semifinals, Smith and Weber outlasted, and I use the term outlasted very, very tightly, Gage Basie and Lars Basie 20-22, 21-15, and 16-14. So the Basie boys actually pulled off an upset, beating Team Sander, Taylor and Brendan Sander. And in addition, there was another upset as Jeremy Casebeer and Alvaro Filho upset Lev Prima and Skylar Del Sol in the quarterfinals. Now, I don't know what happened in set 1, as it's posted as 21-1. I would have to watch that to see what in good golly gracious happened, because there's no way a pair only scores 1 point. That would be ridiculous. Unless it was a forfeit or something of that sort. But either way, yeah. The men's side had a lot more upsets, in my opinion. A lot more notable upsets. But in the semifinals, the Basie boys just sadly could not keep up with Hagen Smith and Logan Weber, as they barely lost to those two 20-22, 21-15, and 16-14 to advance to the finals. Now, you're probably wondering, where have you seen this final before? Billy Allen versus Allison Cerruti and Hagen Smith versus Logan Webber. Well, if you've been paying attention to the AVP, this was actually the same final of the Virginia Beach Open tournament, where Smith and Webber actually wound up winning that tournament. So it was a little bit of a rematch between these two teams, or these two pairs. But in the end, it was actually Billy Allen and Allison Cerruti getting a revenge on Smith and Webber as they wound up winning in 3 sets, as they took the first set 21-14 and but lost the second set 17-21. But then they rebounded very nicely, winning the third set 15-7, winning the Denver Open. So a very great tournament, as both championship matches went 3 sets. And that's what I like in terms of a volleyball tournament, going the distance. So that is that for the Denver Open. And honestly, it was a very underrated tournament. For not being one of the more bigger tournaments out there, I thought it was a very, very good tournament. It was a Tour Series tournament, but it didn't have the bigger names. This next tournament for the AVP is going to have quite the bigger names, as the AVP will now be heading to California, as they'll be playing in the Hermosa Beach Open on July 7th all the way through July 9th. So it's another volleyball event that basically falls on the same weekend as the NVA. So we've got a lot of volleyball this weekend, ladies and gentlemen. You've got the VNL at the Anaheim Convention Center. You've got the NVA at Long Beach City College. And then you've got the AVP in Hermosa Beach. My good God gracious. Talk about fireworks in terms of volleyball. But I'm willing to bet that all the big time names are going to be in the Hermosa Beach Open, including the champions from the most recent tournaments that just happened. So, as for this tournament, there has not been a bracket released, which makes me sad face, but here are the event details. On July 7th through the 9th, 2023, the AVP Pro Series returns to Hermosa Beach, a town where beach volleyball is a way of life. Every athlete wants to establish their legacy on the incredible South Bay sands of Hermosa Beach. Our men's bracket boasts some of the newly minted partnerships and intense rivalries, and the women's field may reveal to us what the future of the AVP looks like. The action is non-stop from Friday through Championship Sunday. So again, there's no bracket that has been released, which is unfortunate. And that was kind of the reason why I didn't really get into some AVP last week, and I just talked about the NVA, but I digress. So the top seed of the Hermosa Beach Open on the women's side is surprisingly Kelly Kolinsky and Haley Harward. So I'm guessing that's probably because they just won the Denver Open, but don't quote me on that. Then the second seed is Megan Kraft and Emily Stockman. Then Zana Muno and Deanna Kraft is the third seed. And the fourth seed is Larissa Maestrini and Liliane Maestrini. And then the next pairs are as follows. They've made the main draw. Jennifer Ketty and Katie Dickens, Corinne Quiggle and Sarah Schermerhorn, Molly Turner and Maddie Anderson, Tony Rodriguez and Savvy Simo, Tegan Van Gunst and Kim Hildreth, Katie Horton and Brooke Bauer, Carly Skogin and Gina Urango, and Devin Newberry and Jaden Whitmarsh. So there are only 4 qualifiers, so I'm guessing they've already finalized the bracket. They just need 2 more pairs to be finalized. So the 4 qualifying pairs that have to do battle with one another prior to the action on Friday are Kelly Reeves and Jessica Gaffney, Megan Rice and Macy Jerger, Lexi Denneberg and Carly Can, and Ashley Patter and Sarah Wood. So those 2 have to basically qualify before playing on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then on the men's side of things, we have, as the top seed, Kame Schalk and Tri Bourne. And then the 2 seed is Trevor Crabb and Theo Brunner. The 3 seed is Team Taylor, Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander. And then the 4 seed is Miles Evans and Chase Budinger. And then the other pairs are as follows. They have made the main draw. Evan Corey and Troy Field, Tim Brewster and Kyle Friend, Paul Lotman and Tim Baumgren, Avery Drost, the former set point guest who was on last week, and Phil Dalhauser, Roberto Rodriguez and Dave Palm, Billy Allen and Allison Cerruti, who just won the Denver Open, Bill Kolinsky and Chase Frischman, and Dylan Merrick and Spencer Sauter. So just like on the women's side, there are 4 pairs in the qualifiers, so only 2 gets to advance to the main draw. That just so happens to be Logan Weber and Hagen Smith, Andrew Dentler and Jacob Landel, John Michael Plummer and Lev Prima, and Travis Meewerder and John Hamilton. So something I kind of don't understand is this. Bill Kolinsky and Chase Frischman finished below Hagen Smith and Logan Weber in last tournament, but they are in the main draw. I don't know if this was released before or after, or I don't know if the entry list was released before or after the conclusion of the Denver Open tournament, but I kind of would have maybe reconfigured that, but it is what it is at this point. So that is pretty much that for the AVP portion of the show. Again, I don't have the bracket. The bracket has not been released yet, and I don't know when the match, who's playing who in terms of the qualifier, but I imagine the Logan Weber and Hagen Smith are playing Travis Meewerder and John Hamilton. And then the other 2 pairs will be facing each other, and then the winners of those will advance to the main draw. And same goes for the women's side. The best player the best pair from the qualifiers faces the worst pair from the qualifiers, and so on and so forth. And that's in terms of points. That's not determining skill level. I'm not saying worst pair, but it's just based on skill. It's just based on number of points. Alright, but that is that for the AVP portion of the show, just because AVP is volleyball too, and we gotta show love to them. Before we head on out, I did have to give a little bit of an announcement, there is news that I need to go over. So this was announced on last Thursday, and honestly, this news kind of was interesting to me. I didn't know how to feel when it came to this news, and I was a little stunned by this news. And the NCAA Women's Volleyball National Championship match has officially found a new home for its television site. Well, it's going to be still played in Tampa Bay, but it's actually going to be on it's not going to be on ESPN or ESPN2. It's going to be televised differently, as it's going to be televised on ABC. And the championship match is slated for Sunday, December 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, which is noon Pacific Time on the West Coast. And then the semifinals are slated to start at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN, and that begins on Thursday, December 14th. So here's how I feel about it. For starters, the finalists will get 2 days off to basically prepare for the opponent and rest up. Because if you remember correctly, or if you remember prior to this, it's basically 1 day off. It would have been just 1 day off in terms of the semifinalists advancing to the championship match. So getting 2 days off is really good. It gets more fans more time to basically buy their tickets and then get their way into the championship site. And again, like I said, it's beneficial to the 2 teams just because it's more rest and more preparation, just because both teams want to be at their best when it comes to facing one another. But here's what I think about everything being played on ABC. So I think it's great. I think for starters, it's amazing that the NCAA Women's Volleyball National Championship is being played on ABC. However, it's being played on a Sunday, which now it has to contend with the NFL for views, which is kind of concerning. I even mentioned this on the Set Point Twitter. On one hand, I'm happy that the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championship is moving to national TV. Major step forward. On the other hand, the big game now has to contend with the NFL slate of games that day, which could be tricky. Because NFL is king, and everyone loves the NFL, and NFL wants to make its moolah, and Roger Goodell loves his money, and he loves bathing in money and whatnot. But volleyball fans will try to manage to the best of their ability, and I'm hoping I can get ESPN, or not ESPN, ABC. But either way, I am excited for this national championship match. On a Sunday, it's going to be really incredible. I just hope I don't have anything going on that day. I am very excited. It's just going to be something I'm going to have to get used to. But in all honesty, it's great because someone did tell me that it almost always means a significant jump in viewing numbers. It also follows the path of softball, women's basketball, and just about every other sport. It's a good thing. And that was from Kim Doss, who is a big-time women's sports fan. She's one of my followers on the Set Point Twitter account, and she's a journalist. So thank you to Kim Doss for for your input on that. But Tiff Wells, who does the play-by-play for Hawaii, says, women's basketball this past season played on their national championship on a Sunday on ABC. And I believe in the same time slot or very close to it. But going to a Sunday does mean that they are going up against the NFL. And that's kind of the concerning part. Can NCAA women's volleyball garner the same views as most NFL games could? Or on average? Because what if you get like a 3-set match? Then the match is over just like that. And then you don't get a whole lot of views. But if a match goes 5, or a match has like a big cash cow, like say the Big Ten, or it has a big market team or something of that sort, or heaven knows it's like a good underdog story or a feel-good story, then maybe, hence the word maybe, we could see an uptick in viewers. But for me, I have mixed feelings on this. I don't think it should have been moved to a Sunday. Maybe they should have moved the semifinals to maybe Wednesday and then kept the final on Saturday. That is just my take. It's just my opinion. If you have your own opinion, do let me know in the comment section, or do let me know on Twitter at set_point.ie. You are more than welcome to leave your opinion. You just got to be respectful. Please do so. I really think the sport of volleyball is growing, and the fact that it made it to ABC is just amazing. So I just wish that it didn't have to go up against the NFL and its views. Now, if volleyball didn't have to contend with the NFL, or if the NFL was in the off-season or something of that sort, or there were no games being played, then maybe the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championship could swoop in the viewers and whatnot. But unfortunately, that is not the case. And sadly, that is basically going to have, the championship is basically going to have to contend with NFL and whatnot. Well, it was either going to be contend with NFL or contend with college football and a little bit of college basketball. But overall, I think having the national championship on a Saturday would have been better still. But I don't know. But that is going to do it for that little bit of NCAA Women's Volleyball Championship Day viewer channel, everything sort of news. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. It is that time that we drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I really do appreciate you. Shout out to the chat room, Adam Karnick, Cale Henderson, Mike Pat, and of course, Larry B. I really do appreciate y'all. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Have yourself a great rest of the show, or great rest of the evening. Enjoy all the volleyball that's happening, because we have the VNL happening in Anaheim, we have the NVA happening in Long Beach, and we have the AVP happening in Hermosa Beach. That's a lot of volleyball happening in California. If you could try to support one, if not all of those, you're amazing. If you want to see me, you can catch me at Long Beach City College on Friday all the way through Sunday. That's where I'll be at. But until then, have yourself a great rest of the evening. Enjoy the 4th of July. Don't blow your hand off. And I will see you on Thursday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Have a great rest of the evening, everybody. Peace!